All right, hello everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of In a Cook's Kitchen with Craig Sewell. If you have any questions throughout the show, please post them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll get to them when we can. Also, any information mentioned in the show can be found in the links in the chat box that I'll post in there. And now, a quick word from our sponsor, Lawrence.
Good evening. Thank you, August. My name is Lawrence Wood. I'm the Director of Advertising and Imaging at Essex Bank. It's my privilege to welcome you all to this 5th installment of In a Cook's Kitchen. I'd like to thank August Schwartz and his team for their work in making this series happen, and to our sales rep, Kathy Suave, for giving Essex Bank this opportunity to sponsor this series. You know, I've come to think that Essex Bank is a good fit with What's Up Media. And both organizations are entwined in the coastal Anne Arundel area and serve many of the same citizens, particularly from our branches in Annapolis and Edgewater. Also tonight, I'd like to thank Chef Sewell.
Oh, well, looks like we lost Lawrence there. Oh, there you're back.
Front of the house. So without any hesitation, take it away, Chef.
Thanks, Lawrence. We lost you for a minute, so you may want to catch up the last of that at the end of class. So welcome. We're in my kitchen again. It's the 5th class in this series, and I wanted to switch gears a bit and get involved in oysters. Today is Earth Day. There are, thank you. The Oyster Recovery Partnership in Annapolis is celebrating Earth Day with several oyster type celebrations. May want to check out their website. We're going to use some aquacultured oysters tonight. You would probably know that there are wild oysters and there were aquaculture oysters. Wild oyster people are usually called watermen. Aquaculture oysters growers are usually farmers. These particular ones are from Double T Oyster Company. They have their beds in the lower part of the Potomac. It's a very sort of medium type oyster. You may know by tasting oysters by their salt content, the high salinity or low salinity, and we can talk about this a little bit more. These are sort of medium between sweet and salty. So I'm going to shuck a couple of oysters. Some of them I've already shucked. Those of you who have taken classes with me before know that I try to do traditional recipes and then use local ingredients to achieve those things. So doing our mise en place tonight, we have fresh oysters, we have Romano cheese, sweet onions, lemons, butter. And one of the things that I've been looking for an excuse to use is spinach that I grew from seed in my backyard. Started it off in seed in the greenhouse and then moved it outside. So we have some nice, extremely fresh spinach that we're going to use. Shucking an oyster, and I don't spend my livelihood being an oyster shucker. Oyster shuckers are you have to adore because it's not an easy job. But when I do shuck oysters, I have an oyster knife with a little protective thing on it because things can happen. This is this part, the bottom part of the oyster, once we're done, this is called the cup. Double T oysters are known for they call it a double cup. So they're rather large, plump oysters, and they have a nice cup at the bottom of it. Some people like to come in at the top. I usually like to come in at the hinge. Find a nice spot, that open, bring it around the outside. And free it up. And then this one's for me. Lovely oyster. Try to keep the juice in as much as you can.
Hey, Craig, someone asked, what would you consider the salt taste level on the double T's?
The actual salinity level is sort of I think it's about a 50 parts per million. I find these medium between a highly salinity and a sweet oyster. And if that doesn't answer your question, toss it back in the chat box again. I'll try to go into more detail. Actually, I'm going to do two things with the oysters tonight. I'm going to do the oysters Rockefeller, and while I was prepping this, I'm going to do a dozen oysters Rockefeller. So that's a dish that's on the shell. We're going to make topping for it. We're going to do it on the bottom shell, nestle it in kosher salt to our toppings, put it in the oven for probably 5 to 8 minutes while the oysters plump up, and then they'll be ready. I got a little bit extra from Spike Meat Yard today, who is from Double T Oysters. And those I've already breaded, and I'm going to do a very quick deep fry at the end of class, because there's few things that are better than fried oysters. That particular recipe is not on the website, but let me just talk you through it. Just basically, if you're going to fry oysters, it's usually equal parts cornmeal and flour, garlic powder, a little paprika. This is Maryland. You probably need to add a little Old Bay if you want to. But then you soak the oysters in after you shuck them, or you buy them in a pint. You soak them in buttermilk, and then bread them, and chill them, and then they're ready to go in a 375-degree fryer. So I'm going to use my little fryer that we used a few weeks ago for pommes frites, and they'll be in and out in 2 minutes. So our mise en place is done. Going to use the ones I just shucked in the recipe. So first, we're going to saute off a little finely chopped onion. The very first class, we did how to slice an onion, but we just took it to a dice. This we're going to finely chop, which is another level of, so find a flat side, follow the lines around while keeping the root end intact. Let's try to make a couple of horizontal cuts here, and then slice it as thin as we can, since we're going to finely chop this. Should be fine. When you finely chop, mince, tip of your knife should never leave the cutting surface. And you just use your hand as a lever. So I'd say that's good enough. So let's take a look at my spinach. I'm going to preheat this skillet a bit because we're going to saute. So we're going to take the ends off of the spinach. It's already been washed, so this is ready to go. You could use frozen spinach in this. One package of frozen spinach, which is usually like 9 or 10 ounces, I would think would be fine. And we're just going to wilt this. So half a cup of butter. And then in goes onion, and in goes spinach. By the way, I don't know if you folks do this, but I usually save these. And this was, my mother used to do this. So use them to grease pans, whether you're baking. Okay, so here we go. We're going to let the onions sweat and the spinach wilt. And I'm going to use some Romano cheese. So I'm going to need about a cup of Romano cheese. One of the classes that I used to teach at the cafe was about seafood. And I usually spent a little bit of time talking to people about how they can buy seafood, what they should look for when they buy seafood, where they should buy seafood, because there tends to be some hesitancy about fresh seafood and whatnot. I jointly taught some classes with my friend Gaylord, who truly is an Alaskan fisherman. Gaylord used to fish for wild salmon in the bay in Alaska, off the coast of Alaska, and all of his product would be frozen. Gaylord would give you chapter and verse that frozen seafood is better for you to buy than fresh seafood. Why? Well, how fresh is fresh? A lot of the major commercial sorts of fisheries, these boats go out for weeks at a time, and the fish is caught and put on ice in the hold and kept and then unloaded. So fresh seafood sometimes might be 2 weeks old by the time it appears in the grocery store, whereas a lot of seafood is cut, filleted, and flash frozen right on board ship, which to his way of thinking and to mine is actually a much fresher product. And then you don't have the sort of worrisome thing that you have when you go into places to buy seafood about, is this really fresh? One thing to avoid is anything that's thawed for your convenience, because fish, shrimp, whatever, thaws out really quickly. So thawed for your convenience means it was thawed at some point. I don't know why. I would rather buy fresh, take it home, thaw it myself under running water for a few minutes. Shrimp thaws out within 5 minutes, and take it that way. The other thing you should do when you buy fresh fish is that trust your intuition. Cup of Romano cheese. If the fish looks a little gray, a little dried around the edges or something, then it's probably been sitting there for a while. When you go to a place that sells fish and they have it in a display case, and you order a pound of tilapia or cod or whatever you're going to order, make sure they take it from the front of the case instead of the back of the case, because that's the way they fill cases. They put the fresh stuff in front and pull the other stuff behind it. So just simply ask to take the fish out of the front of the case. The other thing to do is to always ask to smell it. So if you're dealing at a reputable place, they should put that fish on a piece of parchment paper, walk it around the corner, and put it under your nose. If it smells like anything other than the ocean, eat chicken. So we have our cup of Romano cheese. And a couple more minutes here. I don't know if you can see that or not. A couple more minutes here. Going to need a tablespoon of lemon juice. This is a pretty big lemon. So coming down 95, and if you come out 895 underneath Baltimore Harbor, when you come up on this side, and you're going over the viaduct there has been a really big billboard that says, "Eat Maryland seafood, eat Maryland oysters," which is always a great idea. But then they don't answer the second question for you, which is, okay, where do I buy it? So I'm going to refer you to a couple of things. If you, and I think we dropped this in the chat box and maybe on the webpage. But nevertheless, if you go, I work for SMADC, the Southern Maryland Agricultural Development Commission. If you go to the SMADC, SMADC.com website, and go down to our guides, we have a complete oyster guide there that will show you graphically on a map and then in text where you can go to buy local oysters. In Southern Maryland, we have Double T, as I've just mentioned, which they do at Tall Timbers Marina. You can also order these online. So you can go to the Double T Oyster website. Van Alstein's has it. Hollywood Oyster Company has it. And Ture, which is Ture, Chesapeake Oyster Company, all four from Southern Maryland. And there are more coming up the Chesapeake Bay as well. And the restaurant I used to do Chesapeake Golds from that were harvested around Choptank, the Choptank River. So this gave us a lot of lemon juice. I only want to use like a tablespoon or so with that. So once the saute is done, this comes off the burner. Add the cheese, add a tablespoon of lemon juice, a little salt, a little pepper, and then we're going to spoon that. We're going to arrange our oysters and then spoon this over the oysters and throw the oysters in a 450-degree oven for 6 to 8 minutes. So how do we do that? Get a couple of pounds of kosher salt. This is to hold the oyster shells steady. Okay, I've already pre-shucked some. And since I wanted to keep the oysters cold, they're in the bottom shelf of the refrigerator. Yeah, that's it. When you buy oysters, I should have done it when I showed you, we want to make sure that they're closed, because if they're opened, that could be that the interior is dried out somewhat. It could be that the oyster has died. These oysters are alive at this point, or were alive before I shucked them. So we want to make sure that they're fresh and alive. And if you buy some and you bring them home, put them in the very bottom of your refrigerator, keep them cold down there. Down there where the vegetable drawer is. Now this is a magnificent oyster with a really deep cup.
Greg, someone had a question if you could use crinkled foil instead, and what do you do with the salt afterwards?
The salt, you can do either one of two things. You can save it for the next time you make oyster Rockefeller, or you can throw it away. So it's simply a placeholder. And what was the first part of that, Austin?
Could you use crinkled foil?
I'm just the only thing what the salt does. You see how it's sort of nestled in like this? That's also a good conductor of heat. So it's going to be able to spread the heat evenly around the outside of the oyster. If you can achieve that through crinkled foil, yeah, sure, of course you can do it. But this is the traditional and I think most effective way for being able to do that. So I'm just putting these oysters in the shell. What's remaining in the bowl is some of the oyster liquor. And let's see, have a few left over. Let's put another one here. And one, this was so let's do that.
Couple more questions, Craig. Is that the same for the mussels? If buying closed shells, do you recommend that?
Absolutely. Mussels, clams, the whole thing. If they're open. Now, one of the things with mussels and clams too, is that you may buy a bag of them and you're gonna put them in a bowl or whatever and take a look at them. Some of them might be already slightly open. What you want to do with them that is just take them and pound them on the table a couple of times like that, and they most likely will close, which means that they're still alive. I would save those. If after doing that they stay open, then I discard them. They're done.
And is using the salt to support the shells a standard practice in commercial restaurants?
It is. Yeah, so I mean, and it's the same concept when you see them. A lot of times you'll see them presented that way as well, or on crushed ice. So here we have these. So I think we're pretty good as far as wilting goes. I'm going to take this off the burner, and since it's an electric burner, you don't want to leave it on the burner because it takes forever for the burner to and let's do about a tablespoon of lemon juice. We'll put this aside. We're going to taste that. A little kosher salt. And then I like to use a little white pepper. You can use black pepper if you like, but white pepper. The thing with white pepper is it's so fine, such a fine grind that put it in your hand first. So let this heat up just a little bit more. So when you eat raw oysters, question that frequently comes up, do you chew raw oysters? And their answer is, yes, you do. Okay, so here we go. Oh, lovely. Big guy needs a little bit more. Now I'm going to put this in the oven for 6 to 8 minutes. I know it's difficult to see, but it has all the nice oyster liqueur there as well. The oysters at the bottom, the cheese and the spinach mixture here on the top. And here we go. Top shelf, 450 degrees. We'll set this at 6 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about fried oysters for a sec. Fried oysters. I may have put them back in the fridge. Yeah, there we go. So once again, equal parts flour and cornmeal, all-purpose flour and cornmeal, a little paprika, garlic powder, and toss them really well within this. So don't just like give it a quick toss. You can also like put it in a Ziploc and do it that way. And then you can take the whole Ziploc and put it in the refrigerator. It's usually better to refrigerate these for a little amount of time, as with any breading, actually. A little amount of time so it really sets up well. So we're having 375-degree fryer. This is going to go quite quickly. About 2 minutes for that.
We had another question, Craig.
Yes, sir.
How many oysters per person should you plan on if you're making the
Good question.
Rockefeller for dinner party? And would you serve it as an appetizer or part of the main course?
I would serve it as an appetizer. And at that, as an appetizer, I'd say 2. If you wanted to do it as a main course, you certainly could. And I'd probably double that. Maybe 5 for a big eater, 4, maybe 3 for kids. If you have kids that are adventurous enough to eat oysters. My grandkids are not in that boat.
Okay, what kind of oil did you use in the fryer? And also, could an air fryer work, or would it lose its taste?
You know, I really don't have that much experience with an air fryer. Those things kind of gimmick me out. So I've never really tried it. So I'm not going to even express an opinion on that. The oil in here is a vegetable oil. Now we'll see, because I usually have an operational fryer and just this little guy all the time. And when I use it for pommes frites or use it tonight or whatever, unless I have something that's exceedingly goopy, which is a French term if you're not familiar with that, then I can keep the oil in here for at least a week before I have to change it out. But yes, this is a vegetable oil. Now you can serve this with some sort of dipping sauce, some remoulade. You can do just a mayonnaise with a little relish and Old Bay and those sort of things in there if you'd like. We're almost there. Delightful. And you really don't have to worry about undercooking them because you eat oysters raw anyway. So we have about a minute left. Let me give you some tips about oysters. Also on the website, or perhaps in the chat box, it references a video that we did at SMATIC as part of our Farm to Focus series. And this one is about oystering and oyster people. So it's about 5-6 minutes long. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. It gives you a real idea of how oysters are grown and the people that are growing them, and how, in many ways, the future of the Chesapeake Bay depends on oysters. Oysters process, cleanse, keep clean a lot of the water in the bay. The more oysters we have, the cleaner the bay is going to be, because they're actually filtration systems. So with these double T oysters from the Potomac, it goes into Herring Creek. So it has, these oysters are bringing, the tidal flow coming into Herring Creek is bringing in filtered water from pollutants, water that's filtered from pollutants into Herring Creek from the Potomac. So here we go. Oysters Rockefeller, fried oysters, didn't take a whole lot of time. So next class, 2 weeks from now, we're gonna go outside. I thought we'd go into my backyard, have my greenhouse back there, have my pool back there, we have a little pool party. I thought we'd grill out and do things all grilling. Now, I am a charcoal grill guy. I'm not a gas grill guy, but some of the applications are equally transferable to gas grills, which I know a lot of you have. So at any rate, those are our oyster night. Contact Double T or any of the other oyster people that we have. You can order them online, and we can try to make that connection between the billboard outside Baltimore Harbor and your kitchen, which is my goal. So Lawrence, it's back to you, my friend.
Real quick, Craig, we had some questions for you.
Sure.
Sorry, Lawrence. Someone asked, what's the best way to clean a custom cutting board like yours?
I put what I'm going to do immediately after this is that I always have my bleach water here. As I've talked to you, the recipe is 1 teaspoon of bleach for every quart of water. And I'm going to wipe it down because I've been using fresh seafood and I'm going to wipe it down with bleach water. And then I'm going to treat this with mineral oil. I oil this with mineral oil. This is one of my favorite things. I oil this with mineral water at least once a week, just to keep it the wood nice and fresh and moist.
And someone asked, what is your opinion about farm-raised seafood and antibiotics in seafood?
There's going to be a couple of answers to this. First of all, we need to be aware customers. We need to know how to buy and what to buy. Seafood is extremely problematic in that way. You can see Chilean sea bass on restaurant menus, or you can see it offered at seafood markets. True Chilean sea bass is called what's called toothfish at one point, and it never sold. So they renamed it Chilean sea bass. It is at this point an endangered species. It is a marvelous fish, very buttery, almost lobster-like, and I love it, but I won't eat it. Now, how do I know this? Because if you go to Monterey Bay Aquarium website, they have a program called Seafood Watch. You can go to Seafood Watch and you can download a seafood guide that'll fold up, and it's an app too. Put it on your phone, print out the guide, put it in your wallet or whatever, and it gives you all the commercially available seafoods around the world, actually. Good ones to buy, ones that are in the medium, ones to avoid. There are some fish, cod, for instance, where black cod from the Pacific Northwest is a sustainable fish to buy, whereas Atlantic cod is overfished almost to the point of not being able to regenerate itself. So those are ones to avoid. And so how do you keep all this information in your head? Well, you look at your app, and Monterey Bay Aquarium asks you to do that. Having said that, one of the biggest culprits in having antibiotics and adulterants in food can be farm-raised seafood, in particular, farm-raised salmon. Farm-raised salmon generally, although they're building a big one on the Eastern Shore right now, farm-raised salmon generally are raised in big nets out in the ocean. So concentrated, a lot of fish concentrated in these nets. All the waste goes down into a concentrated area in the ocean. The ocean is generally not capable of being able to cleanse itself in that way. And since salmon are an incredibly active fish, that's what gives them the deep ruby red color in the flesh. If they're left inactive because mussels tend to, create blood in the to help the musculature work, these salmon are actually white. The farm-raised salmon are actually white. Now, but they sell farm-raised salmon that is pink. How do they get there? Well, they add colorant to their food. So it colors their food to the pink color that we associate with salmon. So given the opportunity, avoid farm-raised salmon, go for wild salmon. However, the future of seafood on this planet is with aquaculture and with well-managed aquaculture facilities. And there are well-managed aquacultures, this oyster bed being one of them. There are fish, there are other ones, there are tilapia farms, for instance, that do a terrible job of waste control. And there are tilapia farms that do a pretty good job of doing that as well. Shrimp is another one where shrimp from Southeast Asia, which is the predominant shrimp that you see sold, especially places like Sam's Club and major outlets like that, are all from Southeast Asia. And those come from some pretty nasty aquaculture farms. Shrimp from the Gulf is actually doing a recovery right now. It had disaster with the oil spill several years ago, which filtered down to the bottom. And so shrimping had a real problem for a while. It's starting to come back, but it's one of those problematic sort of things. So aquaculture is the future of seafood, in my opinion, in well-managed, sustainable, regenerative aquaculture farms. Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch should be a must for everybody that likes to purchase seafood, either in restaurants or cook it at home, and look at the good ones to buy. And you'll be surprised. I mean, it's not that there's just like 2, there's like 30. So there's a lot. And also take into account, sometimes you should buy frozen rather than fresh, because the frozen will be fresher than the fresh that you buy. That was about 10 minutes.
That's good. Thank you for that. All
You're
right,
welcome.
go ahead.
Am I on?
You are on.
Okay. As Lawrence again, Craig, I just want to say thank you very much. I look forward to a day that Zoom has a feature that will import fragrance so that we can experience the aroma in your kitchen right at this moment. But for now, we'll just have to imagine. Just wanted to say to you and to Kathy and to August and to everyone who's tuned in tonight, thank you very much on behalf of Essex Bank, and we look forward to seeing you next episode. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.